Finding your identity is not an easy thing to do. In simple terms, identity makes us who we are, but who we are is shaped by the world around us, and the world is constantly changing. Adding to the confusion, the internet has allowed people to identify as anything and everything. With so many different paths to take, finding a sense of identity can be overwhelming. A lot of people go through an identity crisis, and I don't think I'm any exception. I'm confronted by questions like, who am I? What makes up my identity? And what does my future hold? In this rapidly changing world, my search for identity begins with the ancient past.
Yes, voçam dunem, voce Arakeel, unem ankırvar, unem otevan. Azat hayrenik, yerçanik yergir, yerçanik, yerçanik yergir. Bari Arakeel, bakti Arakeel, Arakeel karanan, Arakeel amran, intamad abrir, Bari Arakeel, uynusir zarin, badugadarin. Arakeelin se durakto yerki, yayla obara.
Armenia's history has been one of strength and survival since its birth. As the story goes, Noah's Ark landed in the Arat mountain region after the Great Flood. In 2400 BC, Noah's great-grandson Haik formed a settlement of people in the region that separated themselves from Babylon, which was ruled by the giant King Bel. When faced with the king's army, Haik slayed the giant with a shot from his bow and arrow, freeing his people from Babylon's rule and becoming the first Armenians. In the year 301, Armenia became the first official Christian nation under the patron saint Gregory the Illuminator. Through the rise and fall of many great empires and nations, Armenia has stood the test of time, keeping their faith, language, and homeland alive for thousands of years.
I'm here in Armenia! I'm here in the vineyard. I'm here in front of the St. Gregory Church. I am here at a cafe. I guess they really like frogs here. I'm here getting my haircut. I'm here in the middle of everything.
I've gone to Armenia several times over the years. I've met people there, I've explored the beautiful countryside, and admired the rich history. Being in the homeland of my ancestors connects me to a greater sense of identity. But at the same time, when I'm in Armenia, I feel a bit out of place. Whether I'm sitting at a cafe in the capital of Yerevan or stopping by a market in the rural countryside, the locals immediately pick up on my American accent whenever I try speaking in my native tongue. In response, I'm usually met with their best attempts at speaking English, but I'm trying to improve my Armenian speaking, so I persist and awkwardly manage to navigate the conversation. It is in moments like those that I'm reminded that I'm also an American. I'm reminded that there's more than one part to identity. I view identity as my foundation, as the ground that I walk on. From an American perspective, that identity is up to the individual. That path is wide open. Usually when I tell someone I'm Armenian, I get one of two responses. Oh, that's neat, never heard of that. Or, oh, like Kim Kardashian? Even though Armenian was my first language, I grew up speaking mostly English. My classmates were all American, my friends were all American, the TV I watched, the cartoons, the games, those were mostly Japanese, but everything else was American. I'm an Americanized Armenian. Nowadays, I think people are shifting towards things like political ideologies and even gender as a source of identity. And then you have some people who are obsessed with race, especially I think in America and certain Western countries where ethnicity isn't as closely tied to people, where people aren't as in touch with their ancestors. They look to race, these kind of general pictures of black and white. And I think that's a flawed way of viewing the world, or at least it's a flawed way of finding your identity. Growing up in school in America, most white kids just thought I was a Muslim or terrorist, they would even call me, to pick on me. Nowadays, a lot of people on the internet, I think, would classify me as white. So what white is kind of depends on who you ask and in what setting and situation you're in. I think of identity as two different types. One is fixed in place. Even though I didn't control where I came from or who my parents were, I do think my past is important. I find my backstory in Armenia's history and with the language, food, and culture that my family has passed down for generations. The other type of identity is changing. It's a story that's still being written. Finding my identity feels like writing the script to my own character. And like any good story, there is a progression, a character arc that develops over time. Having an identity that's deeply grounded in culture and history also tends to narrow your path in life. If I truly care about preserving my Armenian identity, then it means what I value, what I believe, and even who I want to share my future with are predetermined. If I marry someone from a completely different background than me, then some of that Armenian identity is lost on my kids. At the same time, it's hard to confine myself to the box that is the Armenian identity when I've been exposed to so many different cultures, ideas, and people thanks to America and the internet. Growing up, I also spent a lot of time on my computer using different online message boards, gaming forums, and I sort of formed an online identity from an early age. My usernames were always based on the characters that I liked and the games that I played, and now you can see that expressed through my YouTube username of Glink. And across the internet, you can see people expressing their identities through their usernames, their profile pictures, through the memes that they post. Somewhere along the way, people started identifying with the celebrities that they worship. In the case of stan culture, which I think is the absolute worst form of expression possible. But the original concept of the internet was that of extreme individualism, where people are able to express themselves in any way and identify as whatever they want. It's really this bastion of freedom, of free expression, or at least it was. But that's a topic for another time. Having limitations does narrow your path, but it also guides you towards something more directly than having endless options and no limitations at all. And that's not to say that your identity has to come from an ethnicity or your ancestors or something like that. I think you can find a fixated, more narrow identity even in things like your interests if you go deep enough. I mean, have you seen my room? I literally wear my interests on my sleeve. Just like my identity, there are certain things about my interests that I don't choose. Deciding whether or not I like a piece of music isn't exactly a conscious choice. But I do choose how deeply interested and invested I am in certain artists and albums. Some of these albums I've listened to dozens of times all the way through. This one is Meriwether Post Pavilion by Animal Collective. I've been listening to this one a lot this year. Strawberry Jam, another great one of theirs. Let me show you what identifying with my interests means to me. The song Peacebon off Strawberry Jam is a great example of a track that I've found a lot of meaning in. The chorus compares an obsession with the past to a dead fly, recognizing that few things are related to the old times, but still hearkening back to the simpler times when people still believed in magic. It ends with a message of looking past words and instead trusting and adjusting your insight. To me, these lyrics conjure up images of Armenian cathedrals, of the stories about Haik and Gregory the Illuminator. It makes me think about the distant past that I'm connected to, but not fully defined by. The song lyrics I find meaning in are connected to the past of my ancestors by the story that I create out of it. Identity is just the story that we tell ourselves. It's your own unique insight of the world. Whether you search on the internet, through your interests, or even in the distant past, finding identity is a lifelong journey. Part of that journey is finding out where you came from, and part of that journey is finding out where you want to go. Having a fixed sense of identity gives me a solid foundation. It provides a perspective from which to view the world. I view my life as a continuation of the story laid out by my ancestors, but that story doesn't end there. Just as my Armenian identity shapes me, I am also shaping my own identity.